What is going on, YouTube? I have a pretty interesting strat today. It's Blight, which is really meta right now, but it's kind of like the more budget version of what you can do before you start getting like a lot of currency and having to run your gear in order to do like the highest end Blight juice. And it's going to be currency, Blight farming, as well as a decent amount of gold. Now that gold is kind of a hot commodity due to all the asynchronous trading, we're going to need a lot of it, and also King's March, all that stuff. So this is my strategy for making gold and also making a good amount of currency to the tune of around 10 to 15 div per hour, depending on how well geared you are. Now the strategy is called Blue Blight, and that is because we're going to be focusing on blue magic monsters for this Blight to make it a lot easier to run and also give us a little bit more gold, because everyone knows magic monsters are the monsters that drop us the most gold. So for the Scarabs, we're going to go with Invigoration. You kind of need to have this just because the Empowering Tower buff for the mobs is incredibly important to juice your Blights. Then we're going to go 1 Risk Scarab, 1 Blight Heart, 1 Wisp, and then 1 Bloodlines. In total, all these Scarabs together probably cost like 120C. Depending on the prices, these will fluctuate, but less than a div. And then what we're going to then do is we're going to roll our maps for high currency or a combination of currency and Scarabs. So I'll link this spreadsheet, all my regexes, all my links, all my leveling stuff, everything that you'd ever want that I have is going to be here in this blue Blight regex. And this first section here is just the modifiers that I don't want to run, which is just leech and then maybe like 3 damage every 10 seconds, that kind of thing. I can run most mods, so I have a very like unstrict regex. If you have a strict regex or there's mods that you definitely can't run, you just get rid of this first part here, come to pathofregex.com, which is just poe.re, and then you go to map mods, and then you just come down here, reset, and then you just look for whatever map mods you don't want. Like if you can't run reflect, you just put in reflect. If you can't run max all res, you just put that in. This will just give you a regex, just then add to this second half of my regex. And this regex here is just pretty much saying you want at least 150 currency or a combination of high currency and high Scarabs. I think it's like 80 currency and like 80 Scarabs or something like that. Just put it into your stash like this. When you roll your maps, it'll just pop up, and then you can just know for a fact these maps are runnable. After that, I tend to use a Deli Orb and currency chisels. Now, currency chisels I think are very cost efficient to use right now because they're only like 6 chaos each. So it's like 24 chaos for the whole thing, which is quite cheap compared to what they normally are. And I think the amount of buff to loot is worth it. But at the same time, I don't think it's like so efficient that you have to use it. You could just use normal chisels if you want to as well. If you want to save a little bit of money here, I don't think that's the biggest deal ever. And if you don't want to use a currency Deli Orb, you can just use whatever Deli Orb. And if you aren't strong enough to run Deli Orbs yet, that's totally fine as well. Just drop the Deli Orb. But that's just personally what I'm running. Notably on gear, the most important thing is that you need to have at least 1 Empowering Towers have increased range. If you're struggling with like, the mobs overrunning you and that kind of stuff, then you're going to want a Chilling Towers freeze enemies for 2.2 seconds while they're affected by the Chilling Tower beams. This is pretty much broken. This Chilling Tower, along with a Stun Tower, makes it so the mobs will just like not move. You will never be able to fail a Blight. However, if you are strong enough that you don't need this defensive layer, you can just go double Empowering Towers, have 25% increased range. And that just makes it so you get a little bit more loot, a little bit more juice on your maps. Awesome. So if we take a look here, it's pretty straightforward. This is all just like very standard stuff. We go into like the most important Blight nodes here. We go into Settlers as our second option, like the Bismuth, because essentially adds mods to rare and magic monsters. And since we are farming magic monsters, that is incredibly valuable because the more mods a magic monster has, the more loot it will give. And then we go into Red Altar. We're just doing that because we are CI and we have Mage Blood, so we can actually ignore like 90% of the altar mods, but you can go blue altar as well if you want. And then we also just take like the standard Hokage rice hat thing here for the map mods plus the quant, and then Bismuth here. This is just standard like really good mods that you're going to always want to take. And then we just take some Scarab chance for our leftover spots. Now, one important thing to note here is we are not taking this Blight lane here. If you are strong enough to do this, go ahead and just go for the Blight spawn. This though adds like 10x the amount of power to the Blight mobs, but it also doubles the loot roughly, I would say. It's very valuable to take this. You are going to struggle a lot if you take this because it's going to add a ton of unique Blight mobs, which are incredibly difficult to kill. I also block these two, but you can change that if you want. If the price of Abyss Scarabs go up somehow, like Abyss strat comes out, or if somehow an Expedition strat pops up as well, and those Scarabs are worth quite a bit, then you can also take those out. And obviously we're taking Ambush Scarabs here just because Ambush Scarabs are generally quite expensive. One thing to note is we definitely go onto the packs because we're running a Bloodline Scarab, so we have 150% increased magic monsters, and these packs are normally magic monsters. So what ends up happening is we're going to be getting like 5 to 10 altars per map. The more influence mobs that spawn, the more altars that spawn as well. Of course, there's an RNG element to that, but that is generally how it works. But yeah, very standard boilerplate stuff. The only notable thing is we're not going Blight spawn just because it's too hard for us. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Why don't I hop into a map and show you guys what exactly we're doing and why we're doing it. So for the map device, we are going to always run settlers. We want the bismuth ore node. It's so much juice. It's very, very nice to have. I think it's well worth the 5C that you pay to do this. One last thing I can mention is if you feel like you're not strong enough to do risk and you're not strong enough to do wisp towers, you can just run Scarab of Monstrous Lineage. In lieu of them, this will decrease your loot a little bit, but it'll also increase your gold amounts, but it makes the maps a lot easier as well. We always go Dunes here just because we tested a bunch of different maps, but Dunes has an open layout, so you actually get like more pump spawns, and the pump spawns are a lot more linear, like they're not as split for the most part. And for some reason, I can't really explain to you exactly why, but compared to other maps like Jungle Valley, Dunes actually performs a lot better. Maybe it's because there's like less shit on the ground too, but Dunes just performed the best out of I think like 7 different maps that we tested last league. That's why we're going it. And to start every map, what we're going to do is we're going to rush the boss. Now, if you see in a bismuth altar, which always looks kind of like this on the minimap, you're going to want to click that shit. We're going to rush the end of the map to fight the boss first every single time. And that is pretty much just because of altar spawns. Now, the way it works is, a little bit of lag there. Altars can spawn 3 potential things. They can spawn boss buffs, they can spawn player buffs, or they can spawn Eldritch Monster buffs. Now, as you can see here, this is Eldritch Monster buff. These are player nerfs. The player nerfs are very good. They can drop things like dupe map, which is just essentially 90% more maps as drops. But it can also give you stuff like quant, currency dupe, scarab dupe, a lot of really, really good stuff. And we essentially want to remove the boss drop from the pool because those usually give you really bad loot. As a result, give us a 100% chance to get one of these altars. And these altars aren't bad either. Like these have the chance to drop increased chaos amounts, increased GCPs, that kind of stuff. So these two are by far the best. And by killing the boss first, we can essentially guarantee that we have one of each of these every single time an altar spawns. So we take this. Oops, Soul Eater and Haste. That's kind of tanky. Okay, double altar spawn. Here's a great example of what I was trying to show you guys earlier, is that by getting the player buff, we have 10% quant here, pretty much for free. We don't really care about the downside, at least our build doesn't. And then here, base currency has 28% chance to be duped. That's like 20% more currency. 600 chaos damage per flash effect. We are Mage Blood CI. We do not care about that. But that's kind of like the upsides for getting the altars and killing the boss first. I can kind of skip this rest of this part, but the rest of the map is just a little bit more of the same. Getting below 50 is good enough. 50 monsters remaining. Just try and get as many altars as you can, because the more altars you have, pretty much the more buffed loot that you have. Let's see here. Base currency drop. Let's take that. There's a little bit of EV and armor, but that's okay. It's worth it for the amount of extra loot we're going to get. One thing to consider is if you see a breach like this, I almost always do them. I don't do the defense breaches. They take too much time, but these are usually good because while you're clearing the rest of the map, you can just do these, and it's quite nice to do because it's like 0 time added on, because you're going to need to clear the rest of the map anyways, looking for the altars. So why not just do this? Get a little bit of free loot, get a little bit of blood on your grafts, or a little bit more blood graft, and then also there are some solid drops you can get from them. Actual end result is not that hard. Like these guys are pretty easy to kill for the most part. So do that. 21 monsters left in the map. That's acceptable for us, you know. We're more than happy just to call it here and then start the pump. So now the one thing we care about now is how many pumps we get and do they split. So this is going to be a 9 lane. This is going to be giga juice here. Perfect. And in these situations, oh, there is a split though, which is really bad. But in these situations, we're probably just gonna have to sack this guy here. We don't really care about them. And then we are gonna wanna set up 1 defensive tower here. And then we are going to want to set up a lot of empowering towers. Unfortunately, these ore spawns do kind of fuck with the pumps a little bit in terms of like how many towers you can spawn, but that's okay. Not the biggest deal ever. We're gonna want a situation like this, set up some pumps here. And essentially the way it works is each one of these that spawn gives you more monsters. And the more monsters you have, obviously the more loot that you're going to get. Now, another thing here is we are going to be spawning a bunch of these green empowering towers. What that essentially does is when we level it to 3, they have increased radius due to our ring anoint. And then also because of our scarabs, give the monsters more power, but also more loot. They stack on top of each other too. So the more overlaps we have, the better. And that's why the increased radius from the ring anoint is really good. And that's why we want to keep a lot of these at level 3, because at level 3, they will have the largest radius. But I definitely recommend that you level up 1 or 2 of them to level 4. One is going to be a smothering tower and the other is going to be an imbuing tower. The left side selection is going to be the smothering tower, and that is just going to make it so monsters in the radius will have decreased defenses. And then the right side upgrade for the level 4 one is going to be the imbuing tower, which just means when you're in the radius of that tower, you will do more damage. So let's just level this one up first. I like to just get all of these towers to green first, level 1. And then it just makes it a lot easier to upgrade the towers while you're, fighting the monsters. A little bit less management to do. I personally do that, but if you find it easier to do something else, you can do that as well. So the more tower overlaps, the better. Unfortunately, our tower overlaps are not great here. I don't know why. Could be because it's near an ore deposit, but having this setup is not good for us. But we set up a double defensive here. So we don't really care about this side of the map. It's only one pump. And also this is a great showcase for like what you do is if there's only one pump here, it's not going to be that much loot. So we can just sack this entire lane and make it entirely defensive. If you do a freeze tower level 3 and a stun tower level 3, these mobs will not be able to move. We don't even need to come back down here ever again. So we can just ignore that entirely and then just come up here and focus on these mobs. Our actual tower spawns are bugged, so we won't actually get that much loot, unfortunately, because we don't have that many overlaps. But for example here, what we could do is we could set up an imbuing tower because we're going to be standing here for the most part. And this just makes it so we do a little bit more damage. And then we can set up like a smothering tower here because that's where a lot of the mobs are going to be. So one imbuing, one smothering is generally enough per map. And they just do a good job of balancing like your damage with monster damage. But as you can see, the monsters are quite squishy. Like we don't need to do that. That's just what I recommend for you to do if you do need to do it. But yeah, if we come back here, again, these monsters, they cannot move. They're getting perma-frozen, perma-stunned. It's just a very nice setup to have, specifically with the Ring Anoint. But yeah, this is just, oh shoot. Sometimes you can get shotgun like that. We had I think we have negative fire res due to the altars, so we have to be a little bit more careful. You don't want to just stand in the middle unga bunga like that, like we were doing. Yes, we are 72 fire res, so we are slightly undercapped where we normally are. And for that reason, I highly recommend use a Ruby Flask just because a lot of the damage that's like really scary for these Blights is going to be fire damage. So having a Ruby Flask kind of negates a lot of that. And yeah, that's the whole map. Very, very straightforward. Very, very easy. And quite a bit of loot. Now, this is like very standard, I would say, for your loot. That was a 9 pump lane, which is the higher end of what you can get. But at the same time, our towers were completely fucked. So we would actually, on most 9 pump lanes normally, we're going to be getting like double this loot. But if we pick up everything here, I can kind of show you guys how much loot we have at the end. And as you can see here, like we didn't get that many tinks. I would say not completely uncommon. Like you're not going to be getting as many tinks this league, but we are going to be dropping a ton of bubblegum currency, a ton of solid like 5C scarabs, as you see here, and also a good amount of maps. And these dune maps sell for 2C each, and these fortress maps sell for like almost 2/3 of a div. A lot of loot here, so much loot that we are going to need to go to our stash tab and fill it up really quickly. But this is kind of a lot like containments. A lot of the loot you're getting is bubblegum currency. 1 or 2 chaos drops and either chaos orbs, alterations, GCPs, random ass scarabs. You're going to be getting a lot of just random currency drops, as well as there's some really big ticket items. Like I dropped a Hinakora's Lock on my first Blight. And on top of that, you're going to drop a lot of uniques. So there's pretty high chance of getting headhunters, high chance of getting mage bloods, that kind of stuff. I think last league I farmed Blight for maybe 5 days to a week, although it was the Giga Blight version, so it was like 2 or 3 times as much loot because of mercenaries as well. And I think I dropped like 3 or 4 mage bloods and 1 headhunter across the probably 200 maps that I did farming Blights. There's a lot of opportunities for jackpot loot, and then also the consistency of just constantly dropping this bubblegum stuff. You have these salvage bounties, which are pretty much just like the abyss hordes that we would get last league that was really meta, and these usually drop you a solid like 20, 30, 40 C of loot on average. They're very, very, very nice to have. And that's pretty much it for the whole map. It's really quite straightforward. Because we're not running unique monsters on our map and we're focusing on blue monsters, we will be dropping a fuck ton of gold and also a ton of XP. Now, as you see here, we killed 2.5k blue monsters. That's on the higher end, but I would be saying that you're going to be killing 1,500 to 2.5k blue monsters per map. And at the start of this map, we had 4,074,000 gold. And at the end of this map, we have 4,430,000 gold. So that's like easily 350k gold in that one map. But as I said, that's going to be like the higher end of the amount of monsters you're going to kill, which is going to be more gold. I was averaging, I think, around 240k gold per map across a 10 map sample size. So you are getting a lot of gold doing this strategy. Anyways, that's it for like kind of how you run the maps and all that stuff. Let's get into the profit analysis and see how much we were able to make across our 15 map test. I only kept track of 15, but I was running this earlier in the league pretty consistently. And this definitely felt in line with what I was doing before. So I felt like 15 was enough. And I also wanted to try out the more juiced Blight setups as well for today. This is essentially how it worked out. It was around 125C investment in just the Scarabs, and then 25C for the 16.5 Dune, as well as another a little bit of currency to like alch scour your maps, and then chisel, deli orb, that kind of stuff. So the total cost per map was around 183C, which was around 1.34 div. So around a div and a third per map. After 15 maps, we had around 38 div from our Wealthy Exile after lowering the price by 10%. So it was like 41 div or something like that. And then we put like a 10 div conservative, like lowering there just to be safe. We were making like around 2.5 div per map, which is 1.2 div profit per map conservatively. So we were clearing around 10 maps per hour. Our build is quite strong. It's very tanky, does a good amount of damage. We have around a year of investment. So that brings us to 12 div an hour. Across 10 maps, we started with 880k gold. We ended up with 3.3 million. So pretty much like 2.4 million gold in 10 maps. So 240k gold per map, which means that even if you're only able to clear like 7 maps an hour, you will still probably be netting like 9 or 10 div per hour in raw div and close to 2 million gold per hour. I think it's definitely the best hybrid strat in terms of getting good currency per hour, as well as farming a good amount of gold to fill your King's March coffers to help you sustain like your async trades, that kind of stuff. But anyways, that's pretty much all there is for the video. I hope you guys give this strategy a shot. It's pretty tough, but I think at the same time, it's very, very rewarding. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked the video, please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I hope to see you guys again in the next one.